Okay, let's take a look at a model APA researched essay. Now, don't let the name researched essay or research supported essay fool you. It's still an essay. And that means it consists of the essay's classic three parts: an introduction with a thesis, a body with at least three main points that support that thesis, and then a conclusion. The only difference is, when it comes to supporting your thesis with those three main points, you get to not only use your own opinions, your own facts, your own arguments, your own stories or anecdotes. You get to draw upon the voices of others, experts, in the form of sources that you quote or paraphrase and then cite. So it's still an essay. It still consists of your judgments, your opinions, your conclusions, but it just so happens that those judgments, conclusions, and opinions are backed up by experts. That's the only difference. Okay, let's take a look here at this model essay. Let's start with the title page. First, a running head that goes in the header area of the page. Then comes, in all caps, a short version of your main title. Notice that in this example, it's the first three words of that main title: improving patient safety. On the far right side will go page numbers starting on this page. And if you haven't already, make sure you're using Times New Roman 12-point type. Exit the header area, and then in the approximate middle of the page, type the full title of your paper, double space, your name, double space, and then the name of your school. It's best at this point to insert a page break to separate the title page from the rest of your paper. So go up to Insert, then Pages, then Page Break. This will take you to your first body page. At the top of your first body page, be sure double spacing is turned on. And now comes the introduction paragraph. In this essay, your introduction has two main purposes. The first is to briefly introduce your topic. This means setting the stage for the reader by providing some background information. In this case, the student author, Marcellus, talks about the 18 years that have passed since a major study to err as human, building a safer health system, was released. Marcellus says, in his own words, that progress has been made, but there is still work to be done. Now, this is a conclusion that Marcellus came to after doing his research and thinking. This is his conclusion, stated in his words, so no citation is necessary. When writing your paper, keep in mind you've done lots of reading about this topic. You have a right to your own conclusions about what you've learned. These are your thoughts, and they should be the foundation of your essay. The purpose of sources is simply to support your own conclusions stated in your own words. That's exactly what Marcellus does. He's learned and stated in his own words that progress has been made, but there is still work to be done. Now, Marcellus backs up that statement with evidence from sources. Let's read. Through initiatives such as the implementation of evidence-based care, barcoding, team-based surgical training, and handoff communication processes, hospital-acquired illnesses have been reduced by 1.3 million from 2011 to 2013. Then, Marcellus provides an in-text citation for this exact information. Key Messages, 2016, pages 4 through 5. Next, Marcellus backs up what he said about there still being room for improvement. He writes, however, even with this great progress, 1 in 10 patients still acquire a preventable hospital-related condition during their hospitalization. And he provides an in-text citation for these facts. Again, Key Messages, 2016, this time page 3. So this is the basic pattern that you'll follow in a research-supported essay. First, state in your own words what you have concluded based upon your research and thinking. Then back it up with the use of a source, which can be quoted or paraphrased, and make sure the source has an in-text citation. Now, in this introduction, after providing any necessary background, comes the second function of an introduction paragraph, to state the essay's thesis. This thesis is your overall slant, conclusion, finding, or judgment that you will be trying to prove throughout the essay. Let's look at the thesis Marcellus wrote. To improve the state of patient safety today, healthcare organizations must stress positive leadership to drive change in organizational cultures, learn to alter basic approaches to patient safety, and leverage best practices from other industries that have institutional preoccupations with safety. Now let's note two things. First, Marcellus is very firm in his conclusion that patient safety must be improved. This conclusion or thesis is based upon his judgment that came out of his research and thinking on the topic. Second, the thesis offers three key ideas on what the healthcare industry can do. In laying out his three key points, Marcellus is signaling exactly how the essay will be organized around those 3 points. So now you see why it's so important to take the time to make sure your thesis is solid and contains the main points you will discuss. You see, the thesis is really a roadmap to your essay. Once that roadmap is clear to you, the writing will come much easier. Okay, let's move on to the first body section and notice the following things. First, each of the 3 body sections will be set off by a subheading, like the one you see here. This subheading should be a phrase, not a sentence, that summarizes the main point that will be discussed in the section. In this case, the subheading, "The Role of Leadership in Driving Positive Change," signals to the reader what point this entire section will be making. Next, notice the format of the subheading. It's centered on the page, bold-faced, and uses title capitalization, which means the first and last words are always capitalized and any major word in between, unless it's an article or preposition like of or in. Okay, let's get an overview of this section. Note that as I bring down the magnification, the section is 3 paragraphs long. So try to avoid stuffing everything into one long paragraph. The reader needs breaks, so look for places where you can divide up each section into shorter paragraphs. Next point. The first sentence of each of these body sections is very important. It has 2 jobs. First, it should use a signal word or transition word to let the reader know where they are at in the essay. So Marcellus uses the word first to signal that this is the first main point. Next, notice that the initial sentence restates the main point from the thesis that this section will try to prove, the role of leadership in creating and maintaining a positive attitude toward change. Notice how these key words have been repeated or echoed in the thesis, the subheading, and now the topic sentence for this section. This repetition or echoing is an important technique to keep your essay tightly organized. Okay, let's get into the first paragraph. As we pointed out, first up is the topic sentence. Quote, "First, leaders are responsible for maintaining positive attitudes, focus on change in their organization." Then, Marcellus explains or elaborates on that statement in 2 sentences of his own. It is well established in the human resources community that positive leadership can produce positive attitudes toward change within organizations. The same can be said for healthcare organizations in relation to patient safety. Now, Marcellus supports those conclusions which are his with evidence from sources. First is the National Patient Safety Foundation, which supports what Marcellus says about the role of leadership. Then comes a quote from Carefoot that also backs up what Marcellus claims about the role of leadership. Now that's a strong paragraph. Let's look at its parts. Marcellus states his main point. He explains his main point. Then he backs up his main point with sources. This is the pattern you should follow in your body paragraphs of a research-supported essay. Now let's take a closer look at how Marcellus uses sources in this paragraph. First, Note that the sources don't just fall out of the sky and land in the paragraph. Marcellus writes a sentence that leads up to the source. For example, when Marcellus writes, "The same can be said for healthcare organizations in relation to patient safety," he is preparing the reader for the next sentence. Indeed, the National Patient Safety Foundation 2015 highlights organizational leadership as the #1 recommendation for accelerating the improvement of patient safety. Notice how Marcellus first prepares the reader for the source information and then uses the transition word indeed to further connect the source to the previous sentence. Marcellus does the same thing with the next source by using the transition word also. Kerfoot, citation 2016, also writes, "Leaders influence and determine what outcomes will be accomplished on the unit, department, and organization. Values and what is not allowed become the culture of the organization." Page 44, end quote. So remember, it's your job as the writer to build in connections between what you say and what the sources say. This is called integrating your sources. Now, before we leave this paragraph, let's point out several more key items. First, when the author's name is part of your sentence, it does not go inside the parentheses of a citation. We see this in Kerfoot, citation 2016, also writes. You see, Kerfoot is the subject of the verb writes. Kerfoot writes. So it does not go inside the parentheses. Second point, when using a signal phrase like Kerfoot writes, set off a quotation with a comma or a colon. That's why the word writes has a comma after it, to set off or introduce the quote. Third, in APA, whenever you use a quotation, you must also provide a page number or a paragraph number at the end. So we see here that the Kerfoot quote can be found on page 44 of the source. Please note that the period for the sentence comes after the parentheses. Finally, all in-text citations must be paired with reference citations on a list at the end of your paper. So, with National Patient Safety Foundation, a corporate author, I should be able to go to the ends on the alphabetical reference list and find a reference citation. And there it is, the full citation. Same for the Kerfoot in-text citation. If I scroll down to the K's on the reference list, I should find a reference citation beginning with Kerfoot, and there it is. Lastly, notice how Marcellus ends the paragraph with his own words. How can leaders step up to this challenge? This sentence helps lead into the next paragraph, where you'll see the same pattern as in all of the body paragraphs in this essay. First, Marcellus states the main idea of the paragraph. Then he explains and elaborates on that point in his own words. Then he introduces material from his sources to back up what he just said in his own words. Again, he also makes sure that the source is integrated into the flow of the paragraph. By the way, this quote from McKee, it serves as an example of how to use a source that you found in another source, sometimes called a source within a source or secondary source. And the answer is, you always cite the source where you found it. In this case, Marcellus found the quote by McKee in the source Joint Commission, and that is what he cites in the in-text citation. Of course, the next two sections of the paper follow the same pattern. First is the bold-faced, centered subheading, which summarizes the main point in a phrase. And this main point will be supported in a series of paragraphs. Here, you see that this section consists of 2 paragraphs. As before, the first body paragraph in the section will restate the main point, then discuss it and explain it in the author's own words, then support it with source material. Same for the second paragraph. State the main point, support the main point with sources. Now, if the author's name is not used in the sentence, then it does go inside the parentheses, as you see here with Pronovost, Sutcliffe, Basu, and Dixon Woods. There is no page number because this is not a quotation. Here's Marcellus's third main point and section, as signaled by the subheading, Borrowing from the Best, What Healthcare Can Learn from Aviation. And after that subheading, you'll see the same pattern, a series of body paragraphs that follow the state, explain, support with sources structure. Now this third section contains what APA calls a long quote, which is a quotation longer than 40 words. When you use a quote longer than 40 words, and you should do so only sparingly, make it a block quotation, which means the entire quote is set off in a block that is indented an extra half-inch from the left margin, as this one is. Please note that, unlike regular citations, the period should appear after the last word of the block quote. Then the parentheses containing the page or paragraph number should follow it, the period. After Marcellus's conclusion, which has its own subheading, comes the references page. This list of references should be set off on a page by itself. Each reference citation is double-spaced and uses hanging indentation, which means all lines after the first are indented a half-inch. Now, our best advice on formatting your citations? Consult the experts. We highly recommend the following samples provided by UMUC's library, which you see here. The library covers all of the most frequent citation situations for both in-text and reference citations. Find the model that fits your source and follow it exactly. Also, citation software such as CiteFast can also be useful. Please see this workshop's thread on APA citations for further information about both. Okay, good luck on your research essay. This model paper will be posted in order for you to refer to, and we hope that you do so often.